the policies about the climate, especially in the western part of the world, is actually hung up of IPCC's climate models. How well does those fit to the observations that you use, that you see every day?
Well, and the short answer is not very well. And we have tested many of these models through the years, and we've really zeroed in on a part of the atmosphere that is very critical, and that's the tropical atmosphere up around 8 to 10 kilometers or so. Because in that layer is where the Earth releases a tremendous amount of heat. So you can think of it like a vent that opens and releases heat and closes, and it keeps the heat in. And what we found with climate models is that they put a lot of water vapor and high clouds there that act to close the vent. When we look at the satellite data, it allows heat to escape much more readily than models do. So the models retain that heat, they keep the heat in, sort of like closing that vent, and therefore the Earth warms up faster than it should be. And when we compare the temperature of that layer with the actual measurements, the models tend to warm 2 to 3 times too rapidly. And that's a huge error to overcome.
Is that by any means scientific accurate, or do you see as that you have to redo or remodel that climate model they're using?
Right. We have published these results. Other people have published the same results, that the climate models are just warming way too rapidly in the tropical atmosphere. And so one thing to do would be for models to figure out how to keep the humidity, the water vapor up there, from getting so moist. Because that's what the models are doing. They're making that level too moist, and that acts like a blanket or closing the vent, in other words. So if you remove that water vapor to some extent, it will allow the heat to escape to space. And here's just one little calculation we did, was that in the real world, when the Earth temperature warms up 1 degree, you have about 2.6 watts of energy leaving. So the atmospheric temperature warms up 1 degree, and the atmosphere sheds 2.6 watts. The same calculation from the climate models showed 1.4 watts. In other words, when the climate models warm up the atmosphere, they don't release as much heat. And so that heat is retained in the system and causes that extra warming that you see in the climate models. And for policy, as you mentioned earlier, that's just shouldn't be the case, because climate models should not be used for policy if they cannot model the system correctly.
No. And I guess that's the whole problem issue. So in your mind, why is it they are so wrong? What are they doing wrong? You told about they exaggerated the water vapor, but what is fundamentally wrong with them?
Well, I think most of them, and I don't know exactly how this works in the climate models, require the humidity, the percentage of moisture, to be constant. So that if you warm up the atmosphere a little bit, you increase the amount of water vapors there to keep the humidity, say 50%, to keep it constant. Well, warmer air holds a lot more water vapor than cold air. And so if you increase the temperature a little bit, that means you have to increase the water vapor, which means you're closing the vent, which means you increase the temperature more, which means you increase the water vapor more, which means you close the vent more, and it's a vicious cycle. And you see this extra warming then occurring. That's one half of the problem. The other half of the problem is that then these climate models are promoted as telling us the truth about what the future is going to be. And if I were just to sum up in a very simple statement, I can say this: the climate models don't agree with what has happened in the past, and they don't agree with each other about what's going to happen in the future. So why would you use them for policy?
Yeah, that's the very good question.